Spoilers. I won't lie, I didn't go into Air with high expectations. Having watched and dropped both Clannad and Canon, two shows also based on visual novels by Key, let's say the dice were stacked against this show before the first frame. And yet beyond the first frame lay a pleasant surprise. I was immediately hooked on the visual design, detailed backgrounds and a saturated colour palette which scratches the exact 2005 itch I designed this video series around. The deep blue gradients of the oceans and skies were a visual feast which immediately set a tone of dreamlike hyperreality. Somehow this palette sits comfortably in the environment while simultaneously subtle and distinct. I just wish I could say the same about the writing, and this really gets to the heart of why my forecast of the show was so pessimistic. I'm going to discuss something which seems really obvious to me and yet I've never seen anyone bring it up, which is visual novel storylines are awkward and unnatural. I'm no expert on VNs, but in general, especially eroge like the one Air is based on, center around a basic structure. The player character spends the first arc being introduced to the rest of the mainly female cast, usually through forced plot contrivances. The writers need to introduce many characters quickly in order to get to the plot, leading to a reliance on tropes like autistic pixie dream girl runs up to you and makes conversation out of nowhere, or literally runs headfirst into you, etc. Then in the visual novel setting, you would pick one of the girl's routes and follow her storyline to the conclusion before essentially going back in time to complete the other routes. Of course, in an anime you can't reload a save, so adaptations need to either choose one route to adapt, in which case you only get part of the story, or somehow force all routes together in a patchwork quilt of jumping jarringly between characters and storylines. It's always super obvious when you're watching a VN adaptation, because the lead will be constantly running into other characters out of the blue, as if the only people who live in the setting are the few plot important people, who also seem to spend all their time wandering the streets, never in a hurry and always prepared to stop and spout exposition at any time. Don't get me wrong, it can be done well, see Steins Gate for details, but outside of the original medium it's always going to be a little contrived and just not a natural flow for a narrative to have. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something if every other weeb seems not to be bothered by this, but to me this is a basic flaw which sadly gets in the way of this show's pretty decent plot. Said plot is also hindered by the way these writers build intrigue. Rather than actually write a concrete central problem to solve, they have characters speak in frustrating vagaries, giving the impression of some grand mystery, where in reality, all problems would be solved if Yukito simply asked, "Hey, why the fuck do you keep forcing talk about flying and magical powers into every conversation we have? It's almost like you're trying to make absolutely sure some hypothetical audience of brain-dead otaku can't possibly not notice the incredibly on-the-nose themes of this show." Speaking of brain-dead people, I can no longer ignore the absolute state of the girls in this show. I suspect this won't be the last time I bring this up. 2005 Moe was very different from the state it's in today. Typical of this type of show, Key's style of blob alien, Down syndrome looking, autism having, vocal tick saying, rootin' tootin' God fearing Moe is just chef's kiss distilled purity. It's hard to narrow down exactly what separates this style of Moe from others. As a start, I'd say it's more focused on various specific fetishes rather than more modern gap Moe. If we take a random modern show like Gabrielle Dropout, oh god, that aired 3 years ago, fuck, is this what getting old feels like? The moe comes from the gap between what each person represents versus how they act, or their own ideas of who they are versus the reality. In this show, the moe comes from girls performing moe-ness, falling over trying to do simple things, or doing something which makes you feel sympathy for them. When Satania fails to be an evil demon lord or whatever, you're supposed to laugh at her delusions of grandeur, whereas when Misuzu drops some trump cards and starts crying, it's not funny, you should feel genuinely concerned for her, you're supposed to want to actually comfort her. This is just the start of my theories, which I suspect I'll expand upon as I review more shows from this era. As an informed weeb, once I saw the incredibly detailed character animation in episode 1, my suspicions were raised and I correctly deduced that this show pulls a Shinbo, front-loading some frankly incredible animation in the first 2 episodes as a hook, before falling back into the standard level of quality you would expect from most TV anime. I was disappointed since the first episode had impressed me so much, but yeah, it's not like I wasn't expecting this. Now there are still some great moments. One that stood out was in episode 5 when Misuzu and Yukito are having a conversation framed against the backdrop of the ocean, and Misuzu starts playing with her hair nervously while speaking about her mother. A very natural movement which wouldn't have stood out at all in live action, but these subtleties are rare and much appreciated in anime, going the extra mile of polish which can push a scene from good to great. By halfway through the show, I'd reached the point which I knew I would from the start. They expected me to be very invested in every storyline we started by now, and yet I find myself struggling to really care about any of these characters, and I think I'm starting to figure out why. Despite all the tragic backstories and plenty of emotional moments to go around, they all feel flat, Everyone's just a vehicle for emotions to happen to, something to push a plot forward or hit a certain beat of sentiment, but I could not tell you any of their long-term goals in life. I can't tell you who they love, why they act like they do, what keeps them going. I can't see myself hanging out with them. I mean, to be honest, I have absolutely zero sense that these people exist outside of the show. I think back to K-On! And every single character feels like a real person. They experience complex emotions, they have friends and goals, and in the end, you just relate to them as a person. By that infamous last episode, you feel all those feels because you actually know these people. Notice I said people, because in Air, I just can't interpret these as people. They're just characters in a story. They are at heart two-dimensional. This is something which is really hard to explain, but you know it when you feel it. What separates a good show from an all-time classic, in my opinion, is the ability to have you actually believe emotionally that you're watching real people have real struggles. I cannot feel like that with Air. Every character just hits various marks and nothing else. There's no extra details outside of what's purely pragmatic for the plot. There's no moment like Yui sleeping next to her guitar or getting distracted by a cute dog in public. Stuff that isn't there solely to move the plot along as efficiently as possible, but to flesh out an entire person. This show has absolutely none of that. You can't have subtle moments because any bit of characterization has to be blown up to huge effect because, well, we have 7 arcs to get through in 12 episodes. You better not be wasting time with any character building that doesn't directly relate to the conclusion of each plot. This problem is exemplified in the atrocious dialogue pervasive through the entire show, which is, big revelation time, the final nail in the coffin which caused me to drop this at episode 6. Let me show you the scene which finally made me snap. So, right after this really good OP, we get this weird dialogue scene straight away between Yukito and that other girl. So, they're talking. I just want you to pay attention to what's happening. She turns around for no reason because she's like a moe girl, and she asks her about her dreams. Just pay attention to the dialogue here. I asked that person, what's an ocean? Okay, it's a dream. It doesn't need to make logical sense. It was so fun that I wanted to wrap up the words and store them forever. And then, title card. And then suddenly, unrelated scene. What the fuck was the point? Why did they do that? What was the point of that dialogue scene? Why would they put that in? It doesn't do anything except another mention of the ocean to push forward the bland and repetitive theming of the show, which is so stupid I got it by episode 2, right? Who fucking speaks like that? You can't forgive it just because it's trying to make someone moe, right? It's just no one. What possible human being, semblance of a human being, would say? It was so fun that I wanted to wrap up the words and store them forever. And then what person would reply, if it was that fun, sleep forever? And then, gao! And then hit you on that. So fucking stupid and obnoxious. These writers think I'm retarded. These writers must think I'm actually as brain dead as the characters they write. I can't deal with a show like this. I just fucking can't. I need to be treated with at least some level of respect by the people who wrote what I'm watching. Like, this is just slightly too far for me. Overall, this may be the best key adaptation I've seen, which speaks for itself really. If you're already a fan of the other shows around this one, I would recommend it, but you've probably already seen it. Outside of that niche, I would say the only value of this show are the visuals and music. If you have any counter arguments, I'd love to hear them in the comments, but for now, I'll give this a 5 out of 10. If you want to follow me on my mission to review every anime from the year 2005, subscribe and I'll get around to shitting on your favourites soon enough. If you want to help me eat and get my music early, you can support me on Patreon in the first link in the description.